We're going to get into the desktop management side of things now. So we kind of started off, very broad, and we're kind of narrowing things and getting more focused as we get throughout the day. Joining us in this session is Jason Cotton. He's one of our senior consultants, one of our more experienced consultants when it comes to System Center and Windows deployments as well. And so he's going to actually take us through the demos in this session, give me a little bit of a break and give you a break from having to listen to me for another 3 hours. And so when we talk about System Center Configuration Manager, it's really kind of built around three particular pillars. One of the big changes that they've made in 2012 from the previous version is how, I guess in 2007 it was really about targeting devices and deploying applications to devices and managing devices. In 2012, they've kind of flipped that around now because we've got users with multiple devices. So a user will have a notebook, they may have a terminal server or VDI session. They've got mobile devices, whether it's an iPhone or an Android tablet or in the rare case, a Windows tablet. And it really, it becomes about providing them the applications to the user and based on the different devices that they might be logging into. So, we have the same idea when we think about, roaming profiles and folder redirection, where no matter what device I log into, I have my same background and I click on my documents and it takes me to the same location where all my data is stored. It's the same idea. No matter what device I log into, if I have, Visio deployed to me as a user, and I log into my local machine, it's going to install the application on the local machine. If I log into the terminal server, it's going to deliver it via AppV. If I log into my iPad, it's going to give it to me via the Citrix receiver. And SCCM 2012 now has the intelligence behind it to be able to do that and to be able to identify the device that you're logging in from, and based on that, deliver the proper version of that application to the user. And that's all about sort of starting to tie the infrastructure together. There's been some changes sort of in the architecture of SCCM, but also tying into cloud services like Windows Intune for managing non-domain joined devices. So you may have contractors coming in that have devices that you want to be able to provide some management and ensure that they're getting Windows Update and that the machine is getting has some sort of anti-malware protection. But they're not part of Active Directory, they're not part of your domain, so you can't apply group policy, you can't deploy your antivirus, you can't apply any of these types of settings to those systems. With Windows Intune, you can do that. Or you may have just devices that non-Windows devices like an iPad that can't be joined to Active Directory easily, or an Android tablet that can't be joined to Active Directory, where we can deploy the Windows Intune agent and get some management over those. Then the other side of things being Azure distribution points, and technically now there's various different types of distribution points that we can have, but there are certain scenarios where you've just got mobile users who aren't in an office or aren't at a location where a distribution point exists, but they have internet access, and so rather than connecting via VPN and pulling all these packages over a VPN connection, we can publish them to Windows Azure, and they can pull them down from Azure through, through their internet connection. And then the last piece is all around simplifying administration. So we'll see that, from an administration role and a security role perspective, there's a number of different roles that are introduced in 2012, so that you can have somebody who has access to the console who just does Windows updates, and prevent somebody, at the manager level, let's say, from going into what they would need to do in the past is going into the actual console to pull up a report. They can have report viewer credentials and not accidentally get in there and say, oh, I wonder what happens if I click on this, or oops, oh well, somebody in IT will figure that out, that I did something wrong. And we've had cases where somebody in IT has gone in and rather than deploying a Windows update to a pilot group, accidentally deployed it to production, and then it breaks some line of business application or blue screens the server or something like that, and then having to go back and remediate that. So it allows you to put those controls into place so that the operating system deployment team can do what they need to do in Config Manager, but not mess around with your anti-malware policies or your Windows update policies or change things within application packages or things like that. So Config Manager 2012, some of the feature benefits within 2012. Desired configuration management has been upgraded with remediation. So in 2007, you could enable desired configuration management, create a baseline basically of what you wanted your workstations to look like as far as updates and software configuration and other configuration. But it was a report. You'd run the report and it would say these 12 machines have drifted out of scope, and here's where they've drifted out of scope. And then you could go in there and you could fix them. Now we've got the ability with certain types of rules that we put in place to automatically remediate those things, so that DCM might specify that, well, I need to have Windows Firewall turned on and enabled. If something happens and something gets in there, or the user has elevated privileges and they turn off that firewall or they disable it, DCM will kick up and the SCCM agent will say, hey, you know what, that's supposed to be on, and turn it back on automatically. So a lot of things similar to group policy, but especially when we get into the mobile world and mobile users where they don't actually aren't always connected to the network, and those group policies aren't always applying on that 8-hour cycle. This allows you to sort of ensure that some of those policies are forced on those systems. Integrated endpoint protection, so Forefront is now called System Center Endpoint Protection. So you may have heard, the Forefront brand is going away, and the different Forefront tools are being rolled into other product sets. So the Exchange protection is being rolled into Office 365 and things like that. What was Forefront Endpoint Protection, your anti-malware, is now System Center Endpoint Protection. So it's a new name. It used to be a plugin for Config Manager, now it's just there. If you enable it, it enables it on the SCCM client. It's one client that gets deployed. It's a role that you enable in SCCM, and it's fairly straightforward to deploy and migrate to. Cloud integration, talks about Intune and Windows Azure distribution points. One thing that's new is user-based self-service. So we'll see it's a fairly basic self-service portal, so users can go and go into the portal and see a list of applications that you publish to the application catalog and say, oh, I want this application. Those kind of site-wide type of non-licensed applications that we either have a license for site-wise or it's freeware that we're okay with our users having, especially as we get into Windows 7 and users are no longer localized administrators, and now they've sort of lost control, and they'll probably be a little upset that they can't go to Google and search for their favorite Schedule Plus application and download it and install it because they don't have privileges. It's something that you could package up and provide via SCCM and have that list of sort of applications that users can go and pick and choose from and get their system set up in the way they want to without needing those sort of admin privileges. And then, as I mentioned, delegated administration and some of the features around that. From an OS deployment scenario, not a lot has changed here. We've got our typical new computer scenario where we can do a Pixie boot of that system or boot off USB or CD, various number of different devices that we can boot off of, and pull our operating system and application packages down and do a fresh install of that particular operating system. We've got our wipe and load or side-by-side refresh, replace scenarios where we take a backup of the user state, wipe the system, load the operating system on it, and then restore those users, the user state. Or we back up the user state, we deploy Windows to a new computer and restore their user state to that new computer in that sort of replacement scenario. And then for remote machines, systems on the other end of a slow WAN connection, or those mobile users who don't come into the office very often or ever, We can create pre-stage or offline media, send them a USB key, send them a DVD that they pop into their machine and they boot off that device, and it'll go through and set up the system as you specified within the task sequences.
Before you go there, what about integration with MGT 2012?
Yeah, so MGT 2012 and the Service Pack 1 for System Center 2012 Service Pack 1, that integration is still there. Same sort of features and benefits.
And sorry, it's not your slides probably, but what about some of the things that are coming with MGT 2012 that are great? We're starting to look at that tooling right now.
Is there anything specific in there that you'd recommend? Or
2012, there's more functionality now with creating your own menus and your own wizards. Integration as far as you can have your applications now in Software Center. If you combine that with installing it through MGT, now you get as a user, you're more self-enabled to install and move your own applications rather than calling the help desk. Right? You can see that status now installed. You see that in
So going a little bit deeper into this user-centric app delivery, it really is around delivering that user experience to that for the user, so that they have that same experience no matter what device they're logged into. And from the admin perspective, instead of having well, I need a 32-bit package and I need a 64-bit package and I have an app-v package and I have all these various different packages within SCCM. I've got one application, I have all the different packages as part of that application, and then I have a set of rules in place that define which one of those actually gets deployed based on what the agent is reporting back. From an admin perspective, it's it's a little easier to manage the system, and from an end user perspective, across the board, the different devices that I have, I'll have those same applications, and so we can target an application based on the user, the device type, as well as the network connectivity that they have. And there's a number of different types of applications that we can deploy. So one of the terms that they use within SCCM 2012 is this idea of a primary device. And Jason will get into kind of how that's defined and how that's set up, but basically every user will have at least one primary device, and that's the device that they use day in and day out. It's my notebook, it's the desktop system that I have, it's my primary machine, where when I have an application delivered to me, it's going to be that local MSI installation. We're going to copy the package down, we're going to run the install script, and it'll get installed locally on this machine. It's my machine. And with primary devices, we can still specify, MSIs, obviously, but we can also, app-v or Zen app if we want. But the non-primary devices then are things like our iPad, our VDI session, a remote desktop type of session where I just use it occasionally. I don't have, I'm on the road and I need to access something internally, so I'm just going to use a terminal server session. Or I have some application that will only run on Windows XP, and so I need a VDI session for that. And so with those non-primary devices, that's where then we can specify, it's not the primary device, we're not going to do the MSI-based installation, especially in a terminal server environment. That's not really a good idea. But that's where we'll then look at delivering an app-v virtualized application or a Citrix Zen app type of application to those types of devices. So no matter what device I log into, I have access to those same set of applications. And this is where SCCM 2012 and app-v sort of tie in together a little bit tighter. So 2012 supports both app-v version 4.6 Service Pack 2 and the newest app-v version 5. They can work side by side together. One of the kind of big benefits with going with app-v version 5 is the reduction in the need of that app-v infrastructure. So with 4.6, we've got an app-v infrastructure that's going to be streaming and delivering those applications. And SCCM just kind of ties into that infrastructure and allows you to control how those applications get deployed. With version 5, SCCM becomes the app-v infrastructure. So we sequence and package up that application on our sequencer, copy that into into SCCM 2012 rather than having to rely on that AppV infrastructure. So it reduces the amount of infrastructure that we need in order to do that. And there are some other new features within AppV version 5. A couple things. There's no more dedicated drive letter. It was kind of a point of contention with a lot of organizations. You know, you needed a dedicated drive letter, and it had to be Q, and that could cause some challenges. With AppV5, we don't need that. We don't have a 4 gig package limit anymore. You know, PowerShell has been integrated into the environment. So again, we have much more broader scripting capabilities. Because we don't have all that infrastructure, we have just a simple web-based console in SCCM 2012. One other thing too is a shared content store for VDI support. So rather than you know, multiple users all logging into a VDI session, all running the same application, all having their own content store, we can share that content store among our VDI users, just reducing space within that environment. This is just kind of a quick slide to kind of show you how, you know, there's different delivery types for Office. AppV being one of those. It's a bit of an eye chart. We are going to have these slides available, but it's kind of a good comparison. But what you'll see kind of as you go across the board is there's a number of ways to deliver Office, kind of depending on the organization. But when we take a look at the two kind of more common ones, being MSI based and the AppV version, we'll see that, you know, we still have, you know, full feature support, full control by the from the administrator. You know, the install controls, you know, same sort of options that we have there. You know, the ability for, you know, things in add and remove programs, start menu shortcuts, and those sort of customizations. So we're not losing anything by moving to an AppV infrastructure. And in some ways, we're gaining some functionality. So this is going to take us to the first demo, and I need to do some fancy switching here so we can start our recording. So in this demo here, Jason will take us through some of those deployment types, user device affinity, the idea of like primary devices, and what that entails. And then we'll get a little bit deeper into the rest of the System Center stack. Just making sure that this is recording. Yep. Here we go, Jason.
All right. That's right. Yeah, so Roddy was mentioning primary user association. So we'll look at what a primary user is and how we define that in the system. And that's going to be in the SCCM console. So we have our devices. This would be all your, you know, the items in your organization. So we got our demo environment here, and here's my demo resources, right? So we can see on this machine, I've got a list of the users in the domain, and in this case, I've got 2 primary users based on the number of logins and time. Oh, sorry, so this is not a primary, it's blank down here. So I could add him down there if I wanted to, right? Like that. And you see be administrator defined. So the primary device is a thing you can use in the system to build out whether apps are installed or not. So we saw we have the ability then to edit those users from here. You can add, if you had a list of users and machines, you could bulk import them into the product as well. And
wait for it to auto select.
Right, and it'll do that as well. Yeah, you can specify actually the amount of time and all the settings in the client agent settings in the tool. Okay. Yeah, so you can define those across different groups of resources as well.
So here I've got my my actual defined user. So what we're going to see on this machine, I'm going to have an app-v installed because it's my primary, not my primary device. And on this machine, there'll be a physical install. Okay, and that's based on the application deployment types. So this is the application list in the tool. If you're new to SCCM 2012, the app model is the application model, which has some new features since the old style of packages and programs, which is still supported. You can see packages in here. So we'll look at Office 2010, x86, which is this guy right here. And we go inside. So that's one application, right? So one item to deploy in the environment, and inside of this, we've got deployment types. So again, the MSI for the physical user, and then the app-v for the non-primary device machine. So if I go in here and edit this, requirements, primary device, false, right? So you can specify, like we have in your operating systems, so you could specify Windows Server get one thing, you know, as well dependencies, you can build out dependencies and have them automatically installed. So the app model is really powerful in that sense. And as well, I like to show you that you can actually add other items in here. Some things Ryan was talking about, the app-v4, app-v5, right, our mobile items. So really still one application based on some conditions you can build out and deploy one item like this, okay? And then we have our app catalog information as well. So we'll get into the app catalog a little later today. Okay. So I'm going to jump over to our first machine here. I'll go to the counterfeiting message. Start demo environment. So we've got our variable software. And if I go into Office, it's already been installed here, okay? And we see that this is actually launching into app-v's shortcut target properties. It's gonna, you know, it's attached to the app-v instance of this thing. So it's here, there we can actually see it's installed in the item here. So you click install, it will install, right? So we understand that that's this environment here, and then on the other machine, I have it available, right? Because it's not installed. I go to the start menu. There's no Office here, right? So we're gonna go run it. And you notice it jumped me from the available software to the install status window. Now this is gonna, we have a visual install here so you can see it go on, and now it's installing. So this, you know,
This is the local installation.
this is the local install of the physical machine. Yeah. So that'd be that.
We need to watch Office install.
No, exactly, right?
You can if you want, but. So as Jason kind of showed you there, right, there's the various different types of installation types or deployment types, so the local install, app-v. There is also plugins for Citrix. So if you're using Citrix XenApp, there's a plugin that allows you to control that XenApp infrastructure from Configuration Manager and do sort of those same types of deployment types across both the Microsoft and the Citrix type environments. Now, I don't know if you caught it, but the other idea behind this with System Center 2012 and Config Manager 2012 is this idea of application self-service. And so what we saw there in that demo there was what's called the Software Center. It's part of the Config Manager client that gets deployed to the desktops. And so through that, that's where a user basically has some basic control over their desktop. And so anything that's published or deployed to the systems as a mandatory deployment will get deployed to their system. They can see the installation status within Software Center, but they wouldn't be able to uninstall it. The other thing is then we can deploy applications that may not be mandatory for that user. They can go into Software Center though and click on the install, as you saw there with the Office installation, and provision that application on their own. And then the other third tier, I guess, is this software catalog, which is an online catalog within Config Manager. It's a role that you enable within Config Manager, and then you deploy applications to that collection or that catalog. And from that then the user can go in there. This is where we can find like other types of applications. So, we've got different versions of Internet Explorer in there. We've got firewall client, app B client, Flash, Reader, Silverlight, plugins, freeware, anything that you want to provide to your end users, so that they've got some of their control back. They've got the ability to go and say, hey, I like this application and I want to have it on my system. And deploy it without them needing to have those administrator privileges, because it is using the SCCM client, the SCCM agent and server communication to basically trigger that installation and use that SCCM action account to actually install that. So it gives them that sort of freedom and that flexibility without actually needing those full administrator credentials. It's a little hard to see here, but the last column there says requires approval. So we do have the ability to specify that certain applications need approval. So it's there, maybe something like Visio, where you can publish it there, but you don't have licenses for everybody, so you don't want everybody to just be able to say, oh, of course I want Visio, of course I want this. Every organization is going to have a user or a set of users, depending on the size. You have larger the organization, the more users you'll have, who will look at this list and they'll just work their way down installing absolutely everything on there, because they might need it one day, or they're bored and they've got nothing else to do, right? So there's certain applications, Visual Studio might be in that list, Visio, Project, things where you need a license to deploy it, and you can put an approval workflow around, you can put an approval process around that. Basically what happens is they'll click on install on that application, they'll say, hey, why do you need this? And what it'll do is it'll create, for lack of a better term, a ticket in Configuration Manager, where a Config Manager admin can then look in there and they can see those requests and they can approve them. There isn't a workflow around it. There isn't any notifications that get sent out by default. It's really just something gets flagged in there, and as a SCCM admin, you got to keep your eye on that and then see that and then make the decision yes or no for that application to be deployed.
Is that an orchestrated workflow that you can build then?
Yeah, so there's a couple other ways to extend that. So you could use Orchestrator to watch for those, again, a ticket is a bad word, but watch for those flags to appear in SCCM and then send an email notification saying, hey, somebody needs to go in and approve this. It's still a manual process to go in and say yes or no. There is also a connector that Microsoft provides that ties SCCM 2012 to Service Manager 2012, so that when somebody goes in and requests an application and requires approval, it creates an incident in Service Manager. So then the help desk gets notified that there's an incident, they see what the incident is, and they can go then and action that. But as far as an email being sent to the user's manager saying, hey, does this person actually need the application? That's not a functionality of this self-service portal, but that can be built with Service Manager, like we saw with the HR example this morning. You could build that into Service Manager. They would go, instead of this portal, they would go to the SharePoint portal, click on application request, Service Manager can query a collection in Config Manager and see a list of the applications that are available, and the user could then click on the application or applications that they want. That's going to fire off an email to their manager to say, you know, does Brian really need, you know, every single application that we've got published to the organization? And the manager can say yes or no to that, and then it will go back to Config Manager and deploy that application out. So there's a number of different ways to sort of enhance that. Default, it's sort of what you saw.
Are easily buildable, or
yeah, I mean, well, so the plugin for if you've got Service Manager to create an incident is fairly straightforward. It's a connector that you install into Service Manager that then watches for those. It's a fairly straightforward configuration. The orchestrator runbook to send an email notification, fairly straightforward depending on your knowledge of orchestrator. It's not that complex. Building out those full automated, you know, workflows. We'll see a little bit more of that in the afternoon, and that can become a little bit more complex. It really kind of depends what your process for approval is and how much automation you want around it. So in this demo here, Jason's going to kind of go through the application self-service portal, you know, how applications are published there, how a user can interact with it, and how they would get access to it. So, Jason, I'll give that back to you.
So the image there in the slide was the portal, right, on the actual machines themselves. So we're going to look at that. Bring this up in, so this is the Software Center, and the easiest way to get to Software Center is really just by clicking on the app catalog from that. You didn't see that. It's right in here. It jumps to the site, the website. A lot easier than remembering, you know, this URL. So we've got, you know, a list of apps that are published. All of these are published to the user in the system. For the app catalog, and typically your Software Center is your machine-based, you know, deployments. So we can see we've got Visio Professional 2013 x86. So let's have a look at that in SCCM and see how that's all built out. Really, it's pretty straightforward. So we've got our application here. Nothing special about the application itself, but if we look at how it's deployed, we have our deployment type, which is just an MSI, and then the deployment, which is, you know, if you're an 07 person, it would be the advertisement, it's going to be known as. And so I've got a physical app, a deployment to a device collection here, the demo applications collection, and then I've also got this deployment. Right. And so as you're creating, going through the wizard of deploying an application, you get kind of these questions here, right? And so the user experience, there we go. The deployment setting tab gives you, you know, this option, require administrator approval if user requests it, right? So there's our collection. Our collection's over in here in assets and compliance. We got our user collection. Right, and so in here, I've got two members, right? My account and the administrator account. Right. And then you have in here you have your entire. In this case, we have our entire Active Directory discovered to bring across all of our users from you know, the domains in the system. Right. So it's basically you go over here to the catalog, find the application. Request it. All right. And you would put out probably a better answer than what I've got for why you need it, and throw that in there. And so from this point, if I'm the user and I, rather than calling the help desk every week, as I'm sure I would do to find out about my app, we can see it's been requested in here. I can refresh that as often as I like to get a new status. And back in the console, under software library, we've got our requests, and this comes up, you know, pretty much instantly as soon as somebody submits it. Okay, and then I've got my approve or deny. Let's say I'm going to approve it in this case. I don't want to be mean. I'll approve it. And back to the system. And refresh. I'm going to hit F5. I'll try this one. And now it's been approved. And this guy here. Right. So now, notice that requires approval. It no longer says yes. And now when I install, I'll give you this little prompt. This is all Silverlight based here, the screen you're seeing. And this ties back into the machine. And it'll actually automatically bring you to this screen and jump you to the next window. In this case, it's going to give me a little notice. I can see it downloading here. So that'll go in and install.
I know I haven't asked you this before. Put you on the spot.
Sure.
Browser versions that works with?
Browser
Who was
versions?
that telling me about Azure? So just as a little note, when I was talking to Michael at lunch there, the Azure portal doesn't work with IE8, but it works with Chrome and Safari just fine.
I have that installed.
No, I'm saying I have it. I use the Mac.
Yeah, so
And it works great on the Mac.
that's a good question. I haven't actually had a customer that didn't use IE. So
So Jason, just on this interface, how
Yes.
customizable, or is that interface customizable at all?
Um,
See how make that easy for some of our business clients to consume?
branding and
and things, yeah. And then the second question is around, if you had to chain applications together, how would that look, or how would that be accomplished?
Right. So the branding, I haven't branded this particular thing. I know that this text here, the organization name is customizable. As far as the logos, not 100%. I know with the reporting server you can do it, and task sequencer you can do some things.
From my understanding, from looking around in it, you can change the color.
Right. Yeah.
From a predefined set of like 12 colors. I haven't seen anything where you can, because it is all Silverlight based, right? It's not, it's not a typical, web-based thing where you can just open it up in front pages, like an example, whatever the replacement of front page is, right? And edit it, or SharePoint Designer and change things like with the Service Manager portal, like you can open that up in SharePoint Designer and brand that however you want. SharePoint. This is SharePoint. Silverlight.
Yeah.
You probably could crack open the XAP file and do what you want, but I'm pretty sure that would terminate any support that Microsoft would give you on that product.
Yeah, it's going to depend on where this image comes from, right? And like so the picture is configurable, right? So, or the sort of color. And then on the dependency side you asked about, so every individual dependency behaves just like an application. So you can have if you had, for example, project, and you had two versions of project, an x86 and an x64 deployment type, each one of those deployment types can have their own set of dependencies with their own set of rules again. And I've done up to 7 dependencies without any problem. When you see it in Software Center, it'll say installing dependency, item 6 of 7 or something like that. So I'll get a retry on this one. I'm ready with that. Okay.
When we get into some of the cloud integration components, as I mentioned, there's kind of 2 tie-ins to the cloud. There's Windows Intune, and then there's Windows Azure. And so Intune, again, if you're not familiar with Intune, it's really it's on its 4th release now, I believe. It's and they kind of update it every 6 months. But it's really kind of the device management for non-domain joined devices. So we can't deploy an SCCM agent to it, but we still want to be able to manage it. So it might be a Windows PC, it might be a Mac, it can be iOS, Android, Windows RT, Windows Phone. There's a number of different types of devices that that you can manage with that. And what it just really allows you to do is, Intune has its own web-based console, and allows you to integrate that into SCCM. So rather than having to go to that web-based console again, you've got sort of that single pane of glass into your environment. Intune is fairly powerful. It does allow you to do, mobile device management in SCCM 2012 is still limited to, Exchange Active Sync type policies. Intune kind of expands that a little bit in a little bit more control over, deploying applications and things like that. R2 for SCCM 2012 actually provides some real mobile device management. So the ability to take an iOS, an Android, a Windows Phone, enroll it in Active Directory, deploy an SCCM agent to the device, deploy applications and policies and all those things that you would do to your standard Windows desktop to a mobile device. And it does support those three major device platforms. There is no support for BlackBerry, and there's no sort of interest, I would say, maybe is a term from Microsoft to do that. To quote Brad Anderson, who's like the VP of Microsoft, one of the VPs at Microsoft, when somebody, he's going through his whole SCCM 2012 R2 spiel and how great mobile device management was and how you can do all this wonderful stuff to all these wonderful devices. When somebody asked, what about BlackBerry? He said, who? So I don't imagine that that's very high on their radar, but iOS, Windows, obviously the Windows devices, iOS and Android, and equal sort of support across the board. It's not like, well, you can do all these wonderful things with our Windows devices, and you can do a little bit with Android and a little bit with iOS. Across the board, it's equal. And from what I've seen, very comparable to some of the real, kind of third-party mobile device management tools out there, like Mobile Iron and things like that. And if you go to, if you just do a search for TechEd 2013 sessions, you'll be able to see all the SCCM 2012 R2 things, and there's some mobile device management sessions on there. Right now, though, Intune is sort of the way that you can expand that out. And with Intune, there's kind of a list of things that we can do there. So there is a malware protection in there. So with Intune, there is an agent that gets deployed. You go into your Intune account, or you do this via SCCM, and you basically create a custom package for deploying your Intune agent. There's some certificates that are part of that, so that your device knows that it's talking to your Intune, not that it's just talking to Intune in general. And so there's that package that gets deployed, and anti-malware is part of that. So it allows you to kind of deploy that, have policies, manage your Windows updates. Won't do Mac updates or anything like that. It'll do your Windows updates, antivirus updates, and things like that. So the antivirus does run on all the platforms, but for Windows updates, it's obviously a Windows thing. We're not going to deploy Windows updates to a Mac. That won't work out too well. But you can also distribute software, and depending on the device, it's going to be different software packages, right? So you can, you're going to deploy your XAP file to your Windows Phone. You're going to deploy your, I don't know what the extension is for a Mac app to a Mac, or to an iPhone, or to an Android device. We'll see that actually on the next slide. You can do some monitoring, so the agent will report back, CPU, memory, disk I/O, things like that. Get some basic monitoring and set up alerts for certain tasks. But it also provides a remote assistance. So in Windows 7, you've got that remote assistance capability where a user can initiate a remote assistance request, and you can then take control of their desktop. This gives you that same functionality, so you can take control of their desktop, whether it's a Mac device or a mobile device or a Windows device, and see what it is that they're doing, and then take actual control of the desktop and show them what they should be doing. So that's quite handy. It does some inventory, hardware, software inventory, basic, what's the configuration of the device, what applications are installed. You can do license tracking. Again, it's very limited, kind of, like the license tracking and inventory in SCCM. It's all right. It's not that fully featured. There's third parties to extend that, but it does fairly well. And then some basic security policies that you can put into place to lock down those systems a little bit. Intune subscription is fairly simple and straightforward. There's some certificates that you need that you basically you need to just go buy a third-party, a valid SSL certificate, and import that into Intune and import that into SCCM. And then from that point, you can go ahead and create your Intune subscription. Allow Config Manager to manage it, and then provide the collection that you're going to use for members of that. So where your mobile devices are or your mobile users are, company name. There's your color scheme for the company portal. Default is Microsoft Blue, and there's like a dozen colors that you can choose from. Your site code, and then what devices do you support? Android, iOS, WinPhone 8, Windows RT, basically your Surface tablets. iOS configuration. Yeah, if you're going to deploy apps to iOS, you need an Apple. You need to get a certificate from Apple that allows you to do that. It needs to be deployed to the devices themselves, so you can use the iPhone config utility to do that. And then you import it here, and then that allows the iPhone, because of the locked ecosystem, the locked ecosystem allows you to deploy those applications. Same thing for Windows 8. You need a code signing certificate. Windows RT, again, there's a side loading key to side load the application. These are all terms for the same thing. It's a certificate that allows you to deploy an application to a device outside of its ecosystem. And then we add the system role, and it becomes available, and we're enabled to connector, and away we go. From app deployment perspective, these are the various types of applications that you can deploy, and the types of devices that you can deploy it to. So from a side loading perspective, for RT, iOS, Android, Windows Phone 8, there's the different extensions that it supports. We can do the Intune agent on real Windows devices and deploy MSIs and EXEs to those devices as well. And then the various different types of web apps and such that we can deploy. So again, depends on the device, but it's fairly straightforward. We're going to deploy APK files to Android devices because that's what they use. We're not going to use that to deploy to an iOS device because they use a different package type. But again, we can see how those can be deployed.
Hey, Rob, sorry,
Yep.
before you move on. So let's pretend for a second that I work for a company that isn't the fastest when implementing and deploying new infrastructure.
We'll pretend.
We'll pretend, right? So does Intune operate as a standalone management solution, or does it only work with integrating into your own SCCM 2012 infrastructure?
No, so Intune is a standalone management environment, and it can be integrated into SCCM for that. Well, I got one tool that I use to manage everything, right? But I can just use Intune, right? I can just have Intune, and I can deploy Intune to all my clients instead of even having SCCM. I don't even need that. I could use Intune to manage everything. That's an option as well, right? And so it is, in that regard, because it is that kind of cloud-based service, I just have to subscribe and buy however many, agent licenses that I need, and I don't need to build all this infrastructure and all this kind of stuff. So in that regard, going outside of those corporate boundaries, you know, it is something that, yeah, we can get it up and running fairly quickly and easily.
And very cost effective as well.
Yeah, I don't exactly know what the cost is. In a lot of cases, you know, over the past, you know, years, you know, since this has come out, at first it was really kind of targeted to small business, but in the last year or so, it's really kind of ramped up. Depending on when you signed your EA, you probably have it in there. They probably just stuffed it in there and said, here's a extra benefit. We're going to give you, you know, 1,000 seats in Intune, you know, things like that. You probably have like Azure benefits in there too that you don't know about. Right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, so there's things like that. But yeah, this is completely standalone. The integration is really just from a management perspective. So I have one console instead of, you know, oh, is that device managed by Intune or is it managed by SCCM, and where do I go, right? It's like that kind of perspective. Yeah, it's not very expensive. It's not very expensive. The one thing that you do need though with that, well no, actually that's only if you do the config manager integration. All the certificates that you need for the standalone one are all just part of Intune. You just need like a VeriSign or something like that certificate if you're tying it into your SCCM. The last cloud sort of integration before Jason kind of gives you a quick demo on this is around this idea of a distribution point for Azure. And so, you know, there's various different types of distribution points, but in general, they all need some sort of server or storage device or something in an office that users are connected to that we replicate from, you know, our primary server to the distribution points, and then those users in those remote offices pull from that local distribution point. There are users who, you know, are mobile and they don't come into the office, you know, they VPN in to grab some files, or maybe they even use direct access to have access to the net, you know, corporate resources. But you know, pulling, you know, Office, which is, you know, 1.5 gigs, you know, over a VPN connection probably isn't going to work out too well. And so getting that localized installation of that application can be a little difficult. In the meantime, you know, everybody, all those mobile users, whether you're at Starbucks or at home, you know, have access to a high-speed internet connection. So if we can take our content, our application packages and things like that, and replicate them and deploy them to an Azure distribution point, which is really just an Azure storage blob, where we're paying, you know, a couple cents per gigabyte per month for that usage of that storage. Users can then go to that distribution point using their, you know, 30 meg Rogers connection at home and get that application downloaded and installed on their machine fairly quickly. There's a couple areas where a couple things that it doesn't do. We're not going to use this for operating system deployment. Theoretically, you know, the storage and the network speed is there if you've got a fast enough internet connection, and Azure storage is, you know, pretty much unlimited. You know, but we don't have the ability to pixie boot, you know, via the cloud. That's not there. Maybe one day. So operating system deployments aren't there. Windows Update.
You don't advertise that? You don't advertise operating system deployment language fixing that? You already have the agent installed.
Yeah, no, you can't. There's no operating system deployment scenarios through Azure. Just leave it there. No Windows updates. Obviously, because we have Windows Update. So within the configuration for Windows Update for Config Manager, we can specify, you know, a number of different update points. So SCCM might be our first update point. If I can't connect SCCM, you know, our second update point might be WSUS, you know, or maybe a downstream WSUS server. If that's not available, because again, I'm mobile, we'll then use Windows Update. So SCCM will still say, okay, these are the updates that you can deploy. The agent will get that communication from the SCCM server, but the client will go to Windows Update. So we don't need to store that in Azure because it's already in the cloud. Application virtualization streaming. So we can deploy the application via AppV, where it downloads the entire application and it's cached locally, but not the streaming bit where, okay, well, I grab these bits and then I access this feature of the application, I'm going to stream down these additional bits. that's not supported. So those are some of the things. There is some monitoring built in so that we can monitor storage and traffic. Those are the two charges that we're going to get from Azure. How much storage space are we taking up? Like how many packages have we stuck up in the cloud? And then also traffic, because all the outbound traffic, so all those packages being downloaded to the clients, we're paying for that as well. And again, it's like a couple cents a gigabyte of network traffic. In that calculator that I showed you in the first session there, you can go in, you can kind of see. You can also set caps within Config Manager. I think the default is like, the default storage cap in Config Manager is like 2 terabytes. You can shrink that down and say, you know what, I want to limit my cloud distribution point to 100 gigs. And then it's probably a good idea to put some sort of life cycle management around that. Right now, we just keep packaging applications, and that, Adobe Reader 8 that was packaged in, 2009 is still sitting there, and it's taking up space on a physical server, but, it doesn't really matter because, whether you're taking up 80% or 90% of the storage in that physical server doesn't cost you anything different. Whereas, in Azure, it would actually cost you extra to have them. So having some sort of lifecycle management around those packages is a little important. And one thing to note, everything in Azure is encrypted. So all your content's encrypted. So even if somebody were to get the URL of your storage blob, get access to, there's also keys, storage keys. If they were to get access to that information, yeah, they could download the content, but it's all encrypted and they wouldn't be able to get any, they wouldn't be able to go in there and download your Office and install it on their machines. That capability wouldn't exist. So this will take us to our last demo. These have ended. And so, do this first. Bring Jason up here for the last demo. We'll kind of look at
SCCM distribution point in the cloud.
Yep. And so, so Jason will just kind of show you quickly the Azure integration and deploying from SCCM to Azure, and then installing that application from the Azure distribution point. Here you go. Yeah. We've lost John. He's seen snacks, and we've lost him now.
So again, we got our environment here, our lab, and we got our little administration that goes on where you deploy new sites and servers and so on. So we've got our site, and we've got a few different things here. So this is our physical distribution point in the environment. And then this is our managed Microsoft.coms, and also this in the cloud. So there's 2 of them here. Only one of these guys is active. I think this is from a previous configuration. But anyway, we got our distribution point and our site system in the cloud with our subscription details set up. Something similar to the Intune wizard, right? You go in, you put a certificate in, and so on. So let's look at this guy. Okay, so we need to be down on distribution points. All right. So we can assign it to groups just like you would do with your existing environment if you want folks to target a list of items to your local stuff and then another list of different packages to the cloud. You'd specify using distribution point groups to manage that. And the content on the server, which there aren't any packages assigned yet. Let me look at this one. That looks better. So we've got on this particular cloud distribution point, we've got Orca and Notepad, and I think this is the console. Yeah. So we're going to deploy Orca to a machine, and it's going to come from the cloud. So we'll go over to our software library and have a look at Orca. So if this is Orca, and I can go content status, it jumps me over to a different page. Let's just do this. Okay, we're targeted to 1. So we've got it on our cloud distribution. And if we go over to here, let's check the machine that we're going to do it on. Number 2. So load this up. And we've got Orca in the list and install. And I mean, from a user's perspective, it doesn't look any different than something comes from your environment. But on a performance point of view, it might be better if you've got a local distribution point on your server and the client is in a remote site where they have a T1 back to the corporate office, right? If your internet connection, as Rodney said, is 50 megabit or something, it's much more efficient to go to the cloud to get it than to go back through the WAN, right? You can manage the cost of that. So some critical updates for your applications, your business apps, maybe you want to put those in the cloud and send them out to your users. And as was said in the diagram as well, the management point, all the software updates, all the application content and so on, it's all from the client connects to the management point to get his policy. So you're still in control of that, and that's published on the internet in your corporate environment. So it's a small bit of data back and forth for the policy, and then the large bits from the distribution point. Simple as that.
Yeah, so we had a discussion with one of our customers who's interested in this, because right now what they do for those remote clients that don't have any internet access or any localized access is, everybody goes to conferences. PowerPoint is not happy. Everybody goes to conferences, right? Wherever, no matter what kind of department you work in, everybody has a conference that they go to. And so they had this remote team of salespeople that never came into the office. They VPN in every so often. What they would do to keep their machines up to date is they would send their technical staff to sales conferences, book appointments with the technical person, at the sales conference, and so that they can get their systems updated. So here they are. They'd have a technical guy from their help desk, fly out somewhere, if he was lucky, Vegas or somewhere like that, right? Meet with these remote salespeople who would never come in to the office, never had, or would only have VPN connectivity, update their systems, install whatever applications needed to be installed, take care of all of that desktop management for all the salespeople at the conferences, and then fly home.
Are they hired?
That sounds like a dream job. Until they send you to a mine in northern Quebec. Or something like that. Right?
Just you.
Yeah.
Ones they like.
Yeah. And so, it was just one of those things, because, the only other option was, this VPN connection and pulling these packages over VPN connections that could take, A, could take forever, B, could cost you a fortune to send over your, your WAN connection. And as Jason mentioned too, some offices might share a T1 connection. T1 used to be all right. It's all right if you're just browsing the internet, but if you've got 15 people using that T1, we're not really a very good connection. And again, pulling packages over that network is not great. And so it's really something that kind of can enhance that. And so just kind of summarizes, simplifying remote user management with some of that cloud integration. But really the other half of that is, sort of that application delivery process and being able to target users and the multiple devices that they have rather than, you know, all these different devices and, you know, having collections and on top of collections on top of collections. It really kind of streamlines that. And then, you know, the self-service portal, as you saw, you know, it's fairly basic. You know, it's not a lot of, you know, automation behind that out of the box. It can be done. It's not very difficult to implement that, but it will, you know, just the general, here's all the freebie stuff that, you know, we're okay with you installing on your systems. Putting that into place is something that, you know, becomes can become a real help to just reducing, you know, some of the help desk calls that that you might get. So that takes us to the end of this session.